Good morning, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good day, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news this Saturday morning. Liberals across the nation are terrified by a rising Christian nationalism surging across the country. We're gonna take a look at a study that has the woke left petrified, and we're going to see precisely why they ain't seen nothing yet. A new study was just released showing that Christian nationalism is indeed rising in popularity among the American electorate. A report from the Public Religion Research Institute detailed the responses of over 5,000 respondents representing all 50 states and who were asked if they agreed or strongly agreed with these statements. 1. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. 2. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. 3. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore, for being Christian is an important part of being truly American. And 5. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The results for liberals were terrifying. According to the study, 30% of the American public either agrees or strongly agrees with every single one of those statements. 64% of white evangelical Protestants identify as either adherents or sympathizers of Christian nationalism. 38% of black Protestants, 43% of Hispanic Protestants, and 52% of other non-white Protestants say they sympathize or adhere to Christian nationalism. Now, these numbers are astonishing, given the tortured attempts by the legacy media to convince us that our nation is getting less and less religious. It's very interesting, because you'll notice here, at the same time, the legacy media is trying to pass our country off as increasingly secular. They're more and more freaked out over the rise of Christian nationalism. I mean, you really saw this come to the fore with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court became public enemy number one for many on the left, who were accusing and continue to accuse the court of wanting to impose nothing less than what they're calling theocratic rule over the nation. Part of this hysteria, of course, is an attempt to galvanize the liberal left revolt against these supposedly theocratic forces. And there's been no shortage of proposals for how to defeat the rise of the Christian right in the process. Unfortunately, for left-wing liberals, all of this coping is just that all of these efforts to galvanizing and fighting back are ultimately futile. Liberals in many ways are guaranteeing that Christian nationalism is the wave of the future. This 30% is just the beginning. And liberals only have themselves to blame. And that's because liberals aren't simply losing. Liberalism is dying. Literally. It's dying everywhere. And we, in fact, have the studies to prove it, and they're going to absolutely blow your mind. A number of studies have examined the significant fertility differences between atheists and the religious, and between liberals and conservatives, and in all kinds of demographic studies. We're talking to all over the world, but particularly in North America and Europe, there was a clear and direct relationship between how right-wing you were and how many children you had. So, for example, in 2010, the average number of children born to leftist liberals in the United States was about 1.8. However, the average number of children born to what demographers termed the far right was 3. Again, this is a pattern that holds throughout the West in both the United States and Europe. On average, conservatives have a fertility advantage over liberals by 40%. But it's even more dramatic when you compare conservative religionists with atheists or agnostics for every one child born to the irreligious to or born to the religious. Another factor in all of this is that children born to conservative Christian families are increasingly likely to retain that religious conservatism into adulthood. University of London demographer Eric Hoffman has documented how the retention rate among the Amish has actually been increasing over the last few decades. It's upwards now to 85% of Amish youth retain their faith into adulthood. Kaufman notes, similar retention rates are seen among conservative evangelicals, talking about 70% retention rate. And what are the reasons for that? As documented by Edward Dutton's research, is that religion and political persuasion are highly heritable, meaning they're largely inherited by genetics. Jordan Peterson has talked about this a lot. There's a wide body of literature that's shown that both religious sentiments and political leanings tend to come from our temperaments. And our temperaments are largely inherited, they're largely genetic. So what this means is that as liberals demographically decline, conservative Christians and conservative religious in general will start constituting a greater percentage of the overall population. And that appears to be exactly what the study on Christian nationalism is finding out. It's already happening inside the church. Conservative evangelicals have grown from about 20% of Protestant churches in the 1950s. Today, over 60%. So the liberal church is basically going extinct. Remember, liberal mainline churches used to be the dominant churches. Now they're quite literally turning into museums. And what these demographic studies are pointing to is that demise is the future of liberals all across the board. It's in just another decade or so, demographers are predicting that the United States is going to be a very, very different place where there will be approximately 4 far-right white females for every 1 far-left white female. In other words, there's little to nothing that liberals can do to stop the rise of Christian nationalism. And again, they only have themselves to blame. If you don't replace yourself, don't expect your vision of politics to continue. So this study on the rise of Christian nationalism across the country isn't so much a warning or a call to action for liberals. In many ways, it's a prophecy, one forecasting their own inevitable demise. And some significant news: Senator Blackburn and Representative Cammack push the Stop Taxpayer Funding of Traffickers Act. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn and Republican Representative Kat Cammack have introduced a measure to stop drug and human traffickers from benefiting from U.S. tax dollars, even after they are charged with a crime. Essentially, the Stop Taxpayer Funding of Traffickers Act prevents anyone charged with drug or human trafficking at or near the border of receiving government benefits. That is defined as the issuance of any grant, contract, loan, professional license or commercial license provided by an agency of the United States or by appropriated funds of the United States. That also includes any retirement welfare, Social Security, health, disability, veterans public housing or other similar benefit per the Senate legislation. It defines a drug trafficking offense as, any federal offense that includes as an element of the offense of the distribution of a controlled substance and covered trafficking offense, as a human trafficking offense or a drug trafficking offense for which any portion of the course of conduct constituent in the human trafficking offense or drug trafficking offense occurred at an international border of the United States or within the territorial waters of the United States. Simply put, the legislation states that, an individual who was addicted for or charged in an information with a covered trafficking offense shall be ineligible for any federal benefit, releasing taxpayers from the burden. Texas Attorney General sues to stop $1.7 trillion bill on constitutional quorum grounds. Rhinos and Democrats rushed through a massive spending bill. Before the start of the new year, there was only a short debate before the $1.7 trillion spending bill was voted on. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is now filing a lawsuit to stop the implementation of the bill. Paxton said, because the omnibus spending bill was never fully enacted. Its constitution is unconstitutional and the federal government should be enjoined from implementing it. The U.S. Constitution requires that a quorum of members of the U.S. House of Representatives be present for the lower chamber of Congress to conduct business when the House passed the Unconsolidated Appropriations Act of 2023. In December of last year, fewer than half of its members were present, and more than half voted by proxy. The U.S. Constitution empowers a quorum was House only, to adjourn from day to day or compel the attendance of absent members because attendance means physical presence. The U.S. Constitution does not allow voting by proxy to constitute a quorum. And because the omnibus spending bill was not passed from the quorum of the House was present, it was never lawfully enacted as unconstitutional and the federal government should be enjoined from implementing it. Court says that Oregon, a sanctuary state for non-citizens, cannot have Second Amendment sanctuary. Oregon is a so-called sanctuary state that refuses to help federal authorities enforce American immigration laws and hold non-citizens accountable. Several local governments, including that of Portland, have similarly claimed to be sanctuaries for foreign nationals who came into the country illegally. A state appeals court has taken issue with Columbia County, which endeavored to be a sanctuary for American citizens' constitutional gun rights, and on Wednesday barred it from dodging Oregon's gun grab laws. Local news reports that some counties in 2020 democratically approved ordinances directing county workers and the police to ignore a number of the leftist state politicians' gun grab laws, including a 2017 law enabling judges to remove firearms from people who have not been convicted of any crimes. The gun sanctuary ordinances entailed fines for those who enforce the gun grab laws. Rob Taylor, A gun rights activist said at the time, quote, "All we were doing was trying to get rid of all the regulations that we believe are designed to eliminate gun ownership." Michael Bolden, executive director of the 10th Amendment Center, told local news that he had encouraged gun rights activists to, quote, "model their ordinances after leftist illegal immigration sanctuary laws," though he reckoned the result in ordinances were crafted, quote, "so poorly that in practice, they actually do nothing." Chief Judge James Egan of the Oregon Court of Appeals voided the ordinance in Columbia County on Wednesday. The court had found that the ordinance would, quote, "effectively create a patchwork quilt of firearms laws in Oregon where firearms regulations that applied in some counties would not apply in Columbia County." You can also accuse the sheriffs who will refuse to enforce the gun grab laws of embracing dangerous ideologies. Supreme Court cancels highly anticipated hearing over Title 42. Immigration and border security case. The Biden administration asked it to do so. So on February 16, the Supreme Court canceled highly anticipated upcoming arguments over the fate of the emergency Title 42 policy that allows the rapid expulsion of would-be migrants at the border. Oral arguments in the case Arizona v. Marcus Court File 22592 had been scheduled for March 1. The new one-sentence entry on the court's docket says the case is, quote, "removed from the argument calendar without any explanation or any indication of how the justices voted on the matter." The Biden administration had asked the Supreme Court on February 7 to dismiss 19 states' challenge to the cancellation of the Title 42 policy. The administration argued that its plan to terminate the emergency on May 11 would make the case moot because for Jae-Hae Jack, the director of litigation for the Immigration Reform Law Institute, which filed a friend of the court briefs supporting the states that favored extending the Title 42 policy, suggested it was unclear if the justices considered the appeal to be finished. Quote, "Perhaps they're waiting to see if the emergency actually ends on May 11. He said China threatened sanctions against us for balloon bursting. The Chinese Foreign Ministry on Wednesday threatened to impose countermeasures against the United States for shutting down the Chinese spy balloon that flew across the continental United States earlier this month. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin grew flustered in his one-state press conference when he was asked to produce evidence of China's claims about the balloon, such as that it was carried only by weather equipment and was unexpectedly blown into US airspace in an unexpected and, quote, "isolated event." Wang also grew uncomfortable when reporters asked him produce some evidence for China's repeated claims that American spy balloons are constantly flying over Chinese territory. Quote, "China has handled the illegal flight of US balloons through our airspace in a calm and professional manner. By contrast, the U.S. overreacted to the unintended entry of a Chinese civilian airship into its airspace caused by force maneuver," Wang sputtered. He continues, quote, "The U.S. needs to give an explanation to China and the international community, reflect on its behavior, stop smearing and attacking China, and stop misleading the U.S. public and the international community. China reserves the right to respond further if necessary," he said. Chinese state media, which has cranked out tons of hyperventilating columns this week, accusing United States of being obsessed with the spy balloon, said that Wang's threatened countermeasures would be the kind of economic sanctions that China supposedly despises, as instruments of Western imperialism. The Chinese propagandists suggested that Joe Biden could begin the process of begging for China's forgiveness by lifting the sanctions imposed last Friday against the 6 Chinese companies associated with the downed spy balloon. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Give me your thoughts below and hit subscribe.